How's everybody doing? Hoping you're having a fantastic day. So today I want to do a very, very quick stream. This one is going to be very short because I just ran across something interesting that I remembered that I wanted to mention sometime, and I figured this would be a good place of doing it because, as you know, there's this sort of common, I guess it's a common myth going around, or this sort of common idea that has arisen thanks to some interesting figures who are putting forth some interesting ideas when it comes to St. Thomas's relation to Eastern Orthodoxy. The sort of narrative is that St. Thomas, in his theological writings, he's not as harsh as other doctors are during his era. Therefore, St. Thomas actually didn't really have as harsh of a view of the Eastern Orthodox as we do today, and they use it to somehow lessen the differences between Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism. So I did a previous video on this, specifically replying to a few clips that Michael Lofton had put together. But this one, I specifically wanted to go into William of Tocco. William of Tocco, if you don't know, I've been doing a series on his work on the life of St. Thomas Aquinas. I guess this is kind of the video that I'm doing this week because I'm a bit pressed on time this week. But William of Tocco was one of the earliest biographers of St. Thomas Aquinas. He wrote a Life of St. Thomas Aquinas, which was used at his canonization trial under John the 22nd in the 1320s, I think it's 1320s that it was done. So it was relatively early after the life of St. Thomas. William of Tocco actually knew St. Thomas, spoke with Brother Reginald, spoke with a lot of the people that knew St. Thomas the best, family members, and so on, in order to write an early biography of St. Thomas. And he dedicates a chapter within this biography. Well, he dedicates a very large section of this biography to talking about all of the errors that St. Thomas Aquinas throughout his life refuted. And one of these errors that he brings up is on the refutation of schismatics and of the Greeks. So this one's a very interesting one. He only dedicates about a paragraph to it, so it's not too much in length. But he's specifically commenting on the work Contra Graecorum, which, if you don't know about Contra Graecorum, or against the error of the Greeks, or on the Catholic faith of the Greek fathers, if you want to be a little bit more ecumenical about it. That's a work. It was written specifically in response to a work called the Libellus de Fide. The Libellus de Fide was a work by Nicholas of Durazzo. And Nicholas of Durazzo was a bishop at the time. He's a bit of what we could describe of as an ecumenist, but he to put it in a no, I'm not going to be nice about this. He forged a bunch of texts. That's what he did. He forged a bunch of texts. It's for really unknown reasons, because he really, in his forged texts, make the Eastern Fathers sound really bad. And this might be to defend some of the contemporary ways of speaking for the Eastern Orthodox. Honestly, I don't know why he forged these texts, but Pope Urban the Fourth, I think it was Pope Urban the Fourth, that was that called St. Thomas. Actually, I can check. Yeah, it was Pope Urban the Fourth. Pope Urban the Fourth asked St. Thomas to write a reply to this, to basically look at the quotes, show how these quotes aren't really contradictory to the Catholic faith, and so on and so forth, and to refute the errant positions of the Eastern Orthodox. So this work was basically St. Thomas showing that the quotes by Nicholas of Durazzo were not against the Catholic faith. And he explains quite well what was going on. But I think, personally, this is my personal belief, and I think this is obvious when you look at the context of what was going on. Contra Graecorum, St. Thomas knew that the works in the Libellus were fake. He knew they were fake. He knew they were forgeries. Why do we know this? Well, we know this because St. Thomas didn't use any of these quotes. At least I hadn't found any of these quotes that he used in the rest of his works. when he could have used them very strongly for some positions he put forward, or to even put in like a state of the question or whatever it may be. So personally, I think St. Thomas knew these quotes were fake, and that's why he didn't use them, because he didn't use forged quotes, because he was a very St. Thomas, in comparison to almost all of his contemporaries, was one of the best patrologists of his day. He was a very learned in the Greek fathers. So when he read these quotes from the Greek fathers, he's like, "Nah, we don't have these, we don't have these texts on us, and I've never seen them before when I've been reading through these fathers. And actually, this doesn't really go in line with what the Greek fathers said. But this work is more so an analysis of the type of language which is used by Greeks and by Latins, which we see in other works of St. Thomas. We see this in Summa, we see it in De Potentia, De Veritate, we see it in especially in Summa Contra Gentiles, actually. He does this at length. Differences of language between Greeks and Latins, and how the Latin term, St. Thomas would say, is more precise, superior. Something like principle versus cause, something like persona versus hypostasis. St. Thomas does think, following Boethius, that these terms are superior. But this whole work, Contra Roris Graecorum, a lot of Eastern Orthodox will use it to be like, look, all of the Latins were using forgeries and they were a bunch of idiots. But they've really haven't looked into the background of what Contra Roris Graecorum was. That's really, really obvious. So after that long introduction, I'll finally get to what William of Tocco actually said about the work, which is really interesting, which gives us a little bit into the mindset of St. Thomas. Because if you look at the end of Book 2, well, really Book 2, I guess, in its entirety, Book 2 in its entirety is really dedicated to Book 1 is dedicated to explaining certain terms that might be troubling. Book 2 is dedicated to refuting the errors of the Greeks. So that's why it's sometimes been called On the Catholic Faith of the Greek Fathers, due to what happens in Book 1. It's sometimes been called Against Errors of the Greeks, due to what happens in Book 2. So when it comes to at least the Book 2 part of this, what St. Thomas, what William of Tocco says about St. Thomas, which is going to be quite accurate, because if he was so happy-clappy, ecumenist, sort of fuzzy feelings towards the Oriental Schismatics, towards the Eastern Orthodox, then his followers aren't going to just describe him the opposite way. I guess you could say William of Tocco was lying, but that's a pretty bad look. So this is what William of Tocco says. So he says, our doctor also crushed a fourth heresy, namely the ancient heresy of the Greek schismatics. Notice he's writing in the early 14th century. So he's talking about the ancient heresy of the Greek schismatics. At this time, it was regarded as ancient. There isn't this sort of, I guess you could say, story that some will put before you, that the Eastern and Western churches, they were kind of like still playing patty cake up till Florence, and they didn't really regard each other as heretics. No, actually, the Dominicans at the time were very clear that they thought that the Oriental Schismatics were heretics and had been heretics for a long time. Beyond the other heresies into which the perverse crime of schism had thrown them, notice they think they're in schism, the Greeks also fell into the error of refusing obedience to the Roman pontiff, the successor of Blessed Peter and the vicar of Christ. At the command of the supreme pontiff, Pope Urban IV, Thomas issued a special treatise against these heresies, in which he compelled them by the clear truth with recourse to the Greek doctors. Our doctor suppressed not only those errors mentioned above, but also any others that were able to fester, if it happened that he had not yet taught the opposing truths of the faith. For indeed, he was the learned writer, setting forth both the old and new truths from the Old and New Testaments. So that's that from William of Tocco. Is actually St. Thomas, very clearly, and his followers knew this, thought that the Greeks were both heretics and schismatics. What he thought of the Greeks. Not in the Greeks in that sense. The Greeks as in the Oriental Schismatics. Okay, well, that's all. Give it a like, give it a follow. You know how it is. And then also, if you want that full video that I made commenting on some of the comments that Michael Lofton's guest made, then you can go to patreon.com/militantthomas to get the whole thing, or I also put a substantial portion on YouTube for free. And I think that was like 2 or 3 weeks ago. So thank you. God bless, and have a fantastic day.